change of plan,
Okay.
right? Because there's a little bit of fatigue in the musculature and probably some tissue that kind of exceeded capacity yesterday. It's probably not best to go with my plan of going into hip as in depth as I wanted to.
You
Right?
sure?
Well,
Love hip work.
so my plan was to, and we will go over this, but I think today is probably best not to.
Okay.
I think today maybe we should pay attention to the SI joint first.
Okay.
But we will take a look at your cars. But the plan was to go into this airplane motion with a loading scheme,
Okay.
right? Because this is essentially what we're trying to achieve as far as abduction with external rotation or control of external rotation and internal rotation.
Okay.
And it also is a way for us to get the head of the femur to start to dive into that hip in a way that's conducive to not jamming so much as colliding. But today would probably be better to pay a little more attention to the SI joint itself.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do 3 cars back and forth on each side, and I'll see what's going on.
Hip car.
Yep,
Okay. Let me just figure out where I have the best.
you got it.
Okay. I have been doing some of those airplanes, by the way.
Cool.
Okay, cars.
If at any point you feel pain or pinchiness in that sacrum, you let me know ASAP.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it feels cranky in all of these posterior,
So cranky solely on the left side or the right?
the right, it's all on the right. Yeah, it's better when the leg is forward of me. As soon as I hitch it up there, I can feel it, but it's not really painful. The worst part is right through there. Pretty well further over here.
Just one more on the side. Any referred pain into the QL area?
No. Mm-mm.
And when you're moving the left side, is the right side still cranky?
Very, very moderately, maybe, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably like a 1, as I'm mostly on the front. So as I'm moving through the front edge, right up into here, and then once I get into this back range, it's fine.
We'll get one more. Good. Nice job. So next up, we're going to take a position on all fours. You'll step through my little hoop here.
Okay.
And let's get the yes. So just the right leg here.
Oh, it's just right there.
Yeah. And with the pipus all the way up here. Yes. And onto your knees for me. Good. So the first thing we're going to do is a decoupling strategy. I'm going to give you some mild distraction.
Okay.
And what you're going to do is get this foot to dorsiflex. Yep. And this foot will stay plantar flexed.
Okay.
Yeah. And now what we're going to do is we're going to bring this knee just a little further forward. Yup. And this one just a little further back. Good right there. Now, this right hand is going to come way close to your right knee. Good. And your left hand's going to come back just a tap, maybe 2 inches. Right there is perfect. So now I want you to try to maintain a neutral lordosis, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah. And now I want you to try and make the hip complex stay flat. I want to be able to put a plate on top of that hip.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now the plate's down sloping just a tad.
To the right.
So it's down sloping directly down to your center right now. So if I put a plate of food on it, it would spill and hit right between your feet. I want you to try and flatten that out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And now using your hands and your knees as traction, you're going to move away from my line of pull and try to keep the hips flat. Good. And now you're going to back up toward me, try to keep the hips flat. Your right hand can be a little more in front of your knee. Yep. And keep that nice slow motion going. Now you can feel how the right hip is now dropping. I want you to try and stop before that deviation happens.
I don't even know how to fix that. Looking in the mirror is like confusing.
No worries. I'm going to place my hand at the top of your back here, or at the top of your hip.
Okay.
And I want you to kind of let this dive a little bit. Good. Keeping the abs nice and tight. Now I want you to start to move away from the line of pull. Good there. And now I want you to back up toward the line of pull, aiming your tailbone. The minute you feel your hips skew, I want you to stop and try and create an even position of your buttocks. So right now that right hip is diving down. And let's go away again. Good. Pause for 1 moment. So right now in this position, this foot is going to formulate a block. And as this hip dives, right, there's a little bit of a skew that happens.
Yeah.
I want you to try to get it as straight as you possibly can. The minute you feel that dive happening, I want you to stop and come right back to neutral. Move away from it. Come right back toward it.
Okay.
Sometimes if the dive happens early, this knee needs to be just a little bit closer.
Okay.
So let's bring that knee just a little bit closer to the other one.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. It's a slight deviation here. And if you can, just move that line up a little bit closer to your inguinal crease. Good right there.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So
Yeah, try
I'm
to keep the
trying to
plate
get.
on. Yep. And reaching the tailbone back toward me as best you can. Good. Deviation's happening. Now let's go back forward. Good. All the way until you have that nice flat surface again. Good. Keep it even as best you can. Back the tailbone up. Good. So the same feeling you have when you're deadlifting and hinging, try to create that very same feeling. And moving away from the line of pull. Good. And back again. We'll get 4 more reps here. Good. A little more anterior pelvic tilt as you move back. Good. And away from the line of pull. Nice. Keep the anterior pelvic tilt slightly as you move back. Trying to keep that plate on the top of your hips. Much, much better. Good. And forward. We'll get 3 more reps. Good. And forward. 2 more reps. And forward. It's looking good. Last one here. And forward. Good. Pause in that forward position. I'm going to change the line of pull. And now you'll be moving perpendicular to my line of pull.
Okay.
I'll apply a little bit of pressure. Every time you complete a successful rep, I'll add a little bit more.
Okay.
Go ahead and push back. Same deal. And then forward. And again, back. So with this exercise, it's a very, very subtle kind of motion that happens at the iliosacral joint. Your femur performs a block, if you will. And because one femur is back and the other femur is forward, there's this very subtle tilt that happens on one side, right? So the right, or your left femur goes into an anterior motion as you're going back, right? Because you're trying to keep this anterior tilt. And then because the femur is blocking the hip, the right hip goes into a slight post tilt, which causes this deviation. So the idea is to get that little space to continue doing this.
Okay. Yeah.
And small degrees of motion start to release that inflammation.
Yeah.
And then cause greater degrees of motion. Right?
Yeah. It feels better already. I can feel like it feels like a little less cranky.
Good.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go into a Spider-Man position. Familiar with that? So I'm going to take that right hip and I'm actually going to get it in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to get it back. One hand's going to be on top of your knee. The other hand's going to be on the ground, securing your position. And this leg is trying to go into a straight position and then down to the knee.
Okay.
Straight position and then down to the knee. You're going to step right through here.
Okay. So.
Yep, you'll be facing me.
Okay. And back. So like that.
Yep. Good. Try the left hand on your knee.
Okay.
Yeah, that's going to give you more freedom at the lumbar and also at your T-spot. It's going to feel a lot better. So then straightening the knee against the line of pull. Good. And down. Nice and gentle. Yeah. Good. Now this is utilizing the glutes and the hamstrings to actually create a slight forward motion and create that little space at the sacrum in the opposite direction. Nice. We'll get 5 more reps here. Four. 3. 2. 1. Nice job. Good stuff.
Surprisingly accurate.
So that type of loading strategy is also really good before you deadlift.
Ah.
Yeah. So it's kind of this amping up of all of those tissues that need to be loose and that need to be active for hip extension. And it's also a good way to start to create space in your sacrum that keeps all of those tissues happy. A lot of times, especially when we're deadlifting, you know, we all learn to warm up in the plane of motion that we're working out, which is a good idea, right? But if the loading strategy isn't extensive enough, especially if we haven't done it in a while, what happens is all of those tissues start to compress further, and blood flow makes you feel good, so you don't feel it right away, right? But little by little, the spaces that need more room start to become tighter and tighter and tighter, and before you know it, we have some sort of impinging either on the fascial tissue or on the nervous tissue or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I didn't do really, the only warm up I did was cars, and I thought about it after. I was like, oh, you know, I really should have laid down and done the kind of the breathing, radiating into the balls, and I should have done that first because I knew I was missing some of keeping this tight on this side, but I was like, oh, it's fine.
So another thing you can do that's going to be more deadlift specific too is a banded warm up. I would anchor this to a radiator or just anything that won't move.
Right?
And you can do one leg at a time, or you can do both legs at a time. I always say depending on how much time you have, right?
Sure.
So the line of pull is as such.
Okay.
I'm actually reaching my tailbone away. If I'm doing Romanian deadlifts, there's gonna be a lot more stress on the hip complex, right? So I wanna try a warm up in both positions, which is conventional and Romanian.
Okay.
And when I do Romanian, specifically, I'm looking at myself from a mirror sideways. I'm looking at how far my hips are able to tilt without me getting that.
Right, so before butt wink, basically.
Yeah. So if that happens, then when I deadlift, it is surely going to happen where I start moving through the lumbar, and even in a very small increment, this could make the iliosacral junction very unhappy very quickly,
Okay.
on top of the lumbar section.
Yeah, I mean, SI joint is like, it's my longest standing injury outside of my shoulder injury, is SI joint dysfunction on the right. So it crops up periodically.
It's like the more active we are, the more these things kind of line themselves up, right?
Yeah.
And even more of a reason when you're actually doing a workout, you know, cars are a great warm up, but in specificity, if we know, you know, I got an iliosacral thing, definitely want to start prepping the iliosacral junction. It's like a
That's
must.
really good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I can do that because I have my ladder, I can tie it to the ladder. So just what, 10, 15?
Yeah, I would say anytime I warm up, I give myself at least 15 minutes. And within that time frame, I usually do 2 sets of
Okay.
a very light load. And this is borderline on the light loading,
Yeah, so.
right? This is like a little bit heavy,
Yeah.
right? So when I do it, I'm going to like 12 repetitions,
Okay,
anywhere between 8 and 12.
okay,
You don't want to OD.
yeah,
And then depending on your rep scheme as well. So if you're max lifting and you're going, you know, sub-maximal is probably going to be 3 to 6 repetitions, right, of some heavy stuff. Then you probably want to warm up with at least 6 to 8 repetitions, not so much 12.
okay,
And then if you're going on the lighter side and you're going high repetition, you probably want to warm up with about 12 to 15 reps on the lighter load.
okay. I mean, nothing I have at home load-wise is gonna be more than, I got 30 dumbbells, you know, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10. So
How many reps do you go with that?
I can do, like with 15, I can easily do, like in a split squat or a deadlift, I can do 25 or 30 easily without getting too fatigued. As I start adding, you know, 20 pounds or 25, goes down.
Okay. Another thing is, you know, with the positional exercises like split squat and stuff like that, all these variations, right? So most people, when they do a split squat, they do a 50-50, right? Which is good. But the 50-50 can be loaded in a bunch of different ways. So number one, you can load with weight, right? And say, all right, today I did 15, tomorrow I do 20, the next day I do 30 or whatever. But also, you can start to load the split squat as far as level from the ground, right? So if I'm holding in a waiter position or a rack position, this is gonna change my center of gravity,
Right.
and it's gonna put more pressure on the hip complex to kind of stabilize,
Okay.
right? One thing that we used to do, one thing that we used to do in Institute of Motion is we would play with mobility or kind of analyzing mobility throughout the split squat position.
Okay.
We found that most people who have a shoulder discrepancy as far as how far into extension they can go without actually leading with the rib cage, we found that anytime we had someone at end range here, the moment they got down to the bottom, this would start to happen.
Yeah, rib
Right?
lift,
So one idea that we got was to start loading those tissues very specifically with a lighter load in that position and start cueing rib cage down as we got closer to the bottom, right?
So even like 5 pounds or 3 pounds or anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
a block,
Okay.
right? So I'm gonna give you an opportunity to feel how that feels. We'll start with block. You're gonna go overhead with one arm.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's go left, yep, exactly. And we're gonna go left leg back. So get into that 50-50 like stance. Good. Pressing with intent as if you're continuously reaching for the end range.
Okay.
Keeping the rib cage down, and you're gonna allow the knee to touch down gently. So super slow on the way down. Yep, always rib cage down, all the way down to the bottom. Once you're down at the bottom, hold position, don't lose the tension, take a deep breath in, exhale, and bear down the rib cage greater. Again, super slow at the bottom.
pausing at the bottom. Yeah, exactly. Making sure that glute stays squeezed. Up as fast as you like. And down again. So this is doing a few different things. Number one, it's changing the center of gravity, creating a different stimulus of the tissues. And number two, every time you focus on squeezing that glute, especially at the bottom here, with this position, you're telling all the tissues that can pull at your hips to be in the right place. And what happens is, usually when people have SI joint issues, that sacrum maneuvers itself just a little bit.
Yeah.
And starts to create more space at the SI joint.
Yeah. And again, it's like, I know that it's part of this whole like rib cage stuff, but it is so under the radar. I just am so used to it, I don't catch it a lot of the time.
Last one here. Good. Stay at the bottom. And now we're going to do another action that helps with the split squat, helps with the iliosacral junction, helps with your shoulder mobility, and also helps with the attention to the rib cage. You're going to drop this into your rack position. Yep. Imagine this is a weight. It is actually, right?
Yeah.
We're pressing, keeping the glutes squeezed. Yep. Keeping pressure into the forward foot like you're trying to crush the ground. And then as you go up, you're exhaling the rib cage toward your hips. No split squat. You're actually staying in the split kneel position.
Okay.
And you're pressing. Good. Live there for about 2 seconds, then drop it nice and slow back to that rack position. Good. Fast as you like to the top. Exhaling to keep the rib cage down. Imagine your left rib cage going towards your left hip. And then down nice and slow back to the bottom. Good. Giving me a proud chest on both sides. So this is a super subtle way to decouple the hip in stillness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working really hard here. It probably doesn't look like it, but.
Just one more. Excellent. Cool. Setting it down. So this is one way to work the shoulder, right? To our range of motion that's adequate for us. And while also talking to the hip complex and the rib cage.
Does it matter where this
Yes.
foot is in relationship? Okay.
So ideally,
forward of the knee or?
yeah, ideally this should be a 90-90 position.
Okay.
And one thing you want to be aware of, especially when you're doing the splits, which is another reason why I kind of gave you another option, is that sometimes when you're going down, this one moves away from that adducted position. So with that split stance, that's another focus. Anytime I touch down, and sometimes for myself, I would put one of those flat circles, almost like a valve slide.
A target.
Yeah, so that I know, oh, I'm off target, right? Yeah.
I have stuff I can do that way.
And with your foot positioning, it should always be within hip width.
Right,
So-
okay, yeah.
So your left foot's gonna come inside. Imagine your hips are brackets. Check me out. Hips are brackets here.
Okay, so narrower, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't really.
Squeeze the glute, crush the ground.
Oh.
Good. Any pain in the SI joint as you're moving?
No, but
Okay.
man, it pulls the
Hip
heck out of
flexors.
my quad and like IT. Oh, they are on stretch big time. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
So this is one of those tricky exercises I like to use. Somebody's like, I want to do shoulder stuff. Okay, we'll do shoulder stuff, right? But we're going to do shoulder stuff that has a huge benefit for other places.
I don't feel anything in my shoulder, but God, I feel so much stuff in my quad and IT band. It's just
There's
like
a lot going on all the way down the line.
massively tight. I don't feel that tightness anytime, usually, I'm not even aware of that tissue being tight, ordinarily, but it feels heck.
So this exercise is definitely outside of the scope of an FRC.
Sure,
Right.
but I'm getting a lot out of it.
This is more along the vein of KMI, right? Tom Myers talks about how when you move this stuff down here is actually moving too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can feel that.
One more repetition, I'm going to show you another variation of the very same exercise. Good. Hold that position. Now, my fingertip is going to be a load here. Yeah? I want you to think about your rib cage leading the force. So, rib cage goes down first. Exhale to make that solidify. And then give me a gentle pressure against my fingertip.
Wow.
Good. Relieve the pressure. Come back to the rack position. Good. Before you start to move, re-engage here. Crushing the ground with the forward foot. Once you reach end range, I perform the load. Nice gentle pressure. 3, 2, 1. Back to the rack position. Last one. Good. Press. 2, 1. Back to the right position. Good. So, aside from talking to the shoulder, which we are, right?
Yeah.
The load is generally light on the shoulder. When I put my hand into position, I'm now loading the lat complex, the serratus complex, everything in the core,
Yeah.
right? And I'm also talking to the tension that's at the anterior portion of the hip, but also talking to the tension that is lying between the iliosacral passage, right? So that little space.
Yeah. Yeah, that is crazy. There's just something like right here that is like squealing like mad. And
Rec Fem, TFL usually are the ones that respond. So because you're in a position with your knee kind of jammed into place, you're not allowed to externally rotate, right? And TFL is a huge external rotator. Hip flexors are a huge external rotator, right? Or I should say they're all involved, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so when you're not allowed to externally rotate and your hips want to do this, the floor acts as friction against that action, so it becomes a stretch.
Yeah, it's outside of my experience that talking to that tissue like that.
So you have a ladder, so
Yeah.
even more so, well, in addition, I should say, lie down flat. Let's loop this through your left leg first.
Okay, prone.
And you're gonna be, yes, actually super. So two different ways this can be done.
So if I had a ladder like back here, I could
Yep, so
attach
this would be
it.
the line of pull, it'd be angled all the way up
Okay.
and back.
Okay.
And what we're trying to do is keep the back of the knee pressing to the floor. Good, and this line of pull should be great in this position because gravity's helping us stay in position.
Okay.
The head of the femur is now being pulled anteriorly.
Mhm.
All I want you to do is squeeze both glutes. Exhale and bear down at the rib cage. Good. This is another great way to kind of use gravity and tension to warm up our extension and then relax it. Good. Back of the knees press, glutes squeeze. And relax it. Now, as you bear down at the rib cage, I don't want your lumbar to force toward the ground.
Okay.
And relax it. Two more. One more. Good. In days when I felt a great amount of pain,
Would you
I
ever
use
do that with both legs, or do you do them just
I like one at a time because then it gives me a general idea of what side is really the issue here, right? What side feels like it's having a very hard time straightening, even with this help,
Yeah.
right? And then the opposite would be, once I feel like I know which side is really giving me more trouble extending, then I would challenge that extension prone,
Okay.
right? And then that line of pull would be the same. The only thing is, it's trying to pull me into flexion. I'm trying to keep both hips even though one's being pulled back, both hips even, and press my pectineus essentially to the floor. And then
Okay.
allow a little bit of hip flexion to happen with the line of pull. When the hip flexion happens, that line of pull is going to want to torque me, right?
So line of pull is moving that way.
Yep, it's high up in the inguinal crease.
Okay, so it's kind of
Yeah.
like that.
Yep, so this is me on the floor, right? Actually, let's do it. You're going to be, line of pull is slightly overhead.
Okay.
So
more
let's
like
say your
that.
bar is right about up here,
Okay.
right? So with a good line of pull, you're gonna feel how the weight actually allows you to hinge a little bit. And the weight being unilateral is gonna want you to do that.
Gotcha.
You wanna try and refrain from doing that. And then you're using your glutes to squeeze into the ground. Make sure you're not externally rotating.
Okay.
And then once you have that, you're also solidifying the pattern with a little rib cage drop. But notice how when I drop my rib cage, I'm not trying to force my lumbar.
Okay. So it's sort of like a hollow body.
Very much so like a hollow body with a hip extension focus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a great way to lead off on all those other things. Especially if that SI issue happens in reoccurrence. I would say this whole sequence we did, starting with the hollow body load,
Yeah.
is probably a good way to start.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's just this.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot going on. So next up, we'll go into a T-spine car. That's
Okay.
why I brought my stick today.
Okay. This is the one I have so much trouble with. Still.
No worries.
This morning when I was practicing this, I'm like, how can I practice this every single day, multiple times every day, and still have it feel so
Foreign.
yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah.
The more we practice, the more we get it. And then the more we practice with somebody like me watching and saying,
Yeah.
right? You get more of a feedback. So your palms are gonna be out here like so, cupping.
Like
Yep.
this.
You're gonna bend your elbows, bringing them as close to your body as you can.
Okay.
Good. This is gonna aid in you keeping externally rotated shoulders. Right?
Okay.
Now, next up, I'm gonna think solely about my head staying still because naturally there's nothing for me to block here. So I don't want my head making the motion,
Yeah.
right? We're gonna go into our flexion first. Good. Once that flexion ends, we rotate. Once that rotation ends, we side bend. Once that side bend ends, extend. Opposite side bend. And crunch it into that rotation. And then center it. Opposite direction. Just one more. Coming back. Good, rest. We're gonna get a little pokey here.
So bad.
Nothing is bad. It just needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah.
That's all. So we're going into full flexion first.
Okay.
I'm gonna place my fingertips right at the top of your hips here. Full flexion. Good. Rotate.
Which way?
Any which way. We're gonna go in both directions. Feel what I'm doing here?
Yes.
That's because the hip complex starts to move with us here.
Yeah.
Right? Side bend. Good. Extend. rotate, yeah. Stay extended, side bend. Good. Now left rib cage goes toward the right hip for that rotation and flex state. Left rib cage toward the right hip. This guy goes
Can't even think what that is.
Yeah, think of a diagonal motion from your left rib cage toward your hip.
Alright.
Now rotate right. Good. Side bend. Good. Extend. Stay extended. Side bend, no rotation yet. Good. Now rotate the right rib cage toward your left hip. Yeah, big flexion and center it. Again, to the left, rotate. Side bend. Extend. Stay extended, no rotation yet. Excellent. Left rib cage to the right hip, diagonal motion. Into the flexed position and center. One more time, the opposite direction. Side bend. Extend. Good. No rotation yet. Keep side bending. Good. Now rotate that right rib cage toward the left hip. Big flexion and center. Good. That was a lot better. So you can feel anytime that hip is moving,
Yeah.
I'm like jamming my fingertips in it to make sure it doesn't move, right?
I don't think I really recognized how much my pelvis was moving.
Yeah, and then the second thing, which is probably one of the more noticeable things that I saw, was when you are going into your extension, first of all, your side bend can use a little more focus of not just tension here, but opening here, right? So when we think of tension here, we get a little side bend. When we think of opening here, all of a sudden we get more action from this tissue that's on stretch,
Yeah.
right? And then once we're in that side bend position, when you're going into extension, sometimes you start to rotate a little too soon.
Okay.
Right? So really trying to feel that side bend and extend, center the extension, side bend and extension on the opposite side, and then left rib cage toward the right hip. So when I say diagonal action,
Yeah.
imagine there's a rubber band here and a rubber band here, and those rubber bands are trying to close in toward each other. That's going to create a nice rotation and flex stick. Yeah. Yep. So specific to that position, right? A lot of times this rib cage flare sometimes is an issue with the tissues here not contracting when you want them to, right? So a little bit of entropy-based motion, right? But sometimes it's because these tissues here are so into moving with an action that they really shouldn't be involved with at that time. And sometimes this tension, whether it be QL, obliques, or maybe even a lateral deviation of the lumbar in some people's cases, right? I see this especially with people who've had herniated discs, where L4, L5 will start to shift. And when that happens, you know, you get this kind of jut motion,
Right.
right? Some people will even display that when they're spasming. So when you look at someone and you're like, stand up straight, and they're like, I am straight,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of times what's necessary is just trying to get these tissues to be on stretch more,
Yeah.
to feel like they're lengthening, to get them to rotate into that length. And a lot of times we can do pails and rails right from that position. And it's pretty tricky to do so on your own, but once you get the feeling, you'll see what I mean. So let's say we use the I'm not gonna use the mirror because I don't want that to break. If I rotate here, there's a couple different positions I like to use. Number one, I like to use this right up against the body, also because the shoulders have a feeling of moving away from the bar,
Okay.
right? And there's another one where I can actually put this right against my sternum, obviously staying away from the xiphoid process, and shoulders try to move away from that position. So whichever one you feel more comfortable with is fine.
Okay.
But we are going to find your rotated state. So if I'm here and I widen my knees to stabilize, I go into my flexion, I go into my rotation. Now I'm gonna find a wall to keep me in that rotation. I'm gonna try to feel the same positioning at my chest, and I can actually feel if the bar starts to leave.
Okay.
That means this is an arm motion that's happening.
Right.
So I'm gonna try to keep the arms constant. I wedge myself into the wall, and I'm trying to go as far as I can into this position of stretch.
Okay.
Once I'm in this position of stretch, obviously I would stay here for about 2 minutes.
Yep.
And then I would pails against the wall. So I'm actually trying to bend this bar,
Pull the bar
right?
back.
So
Okay.
this wall is acting as my block.
Right, so you're trying to rotate away. Okay.
Yep. And then I'm trying to go into my rails, which is going toward the regressive tissue even further.
Right.
And it might take a few trial and error goes
Yeah.
to see where your angle is best caught.
Okay.
And it might even necessitate that you go a little bit wider on your bar, right? Because
Okay.
maybe this bar will have too much action with your hands closed. Maybe it's going a little bit wider. Wedging myself in. And I try, oh, I can move. That's a good position of stretch. And then I would try to go with it even
Okay.
further into that rotation.
Okay. I gotta think about that for a second. So, I'm trying to come into more rotation. So are you pulling your tailbone? So are you trying to get flexion in your lumbar spine as well? I'm
So
not sure.
the lumbar spine is going to stay as neutral as it can. We're trying to work from that point of
Okay,
T12.
so just T-spine.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So a lot of times when I do this,
Yeah.
I'm aiming at this.
Okay.
Right? Like I said, I told you in that email. Sometimes
Yeah.
when I place my hand, it feels like this is supposed to be moving. It's this last piece
I got
of
you.
that T-spine, the very bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
T12.
T12. Okay. Okay. So, trying to figure out how I would set that up at home. So, what if I don't have a stick? Is there something I could, could I do that with a band somehow? Is there a?
The band, the band would probably be a different line of pull. But yes, you
I
can.
have some sticks, but I don't have anything quite that stable. And I don't know if I have anything that's the right.
No worries. Yeah. So let's go into your full kneel position.
I'm gonna make sure.
Yeah.
Can I be over here
Yeah.
where? Okay, so I can definitely have that.
So with the band, we want to create as little give of the band as possible.
Uh-huh.
Right? And in this case, let's see.
If I
So
want to
it's
stretch through.
right rib cage is the popper, left rib cage is the popper, right rib cage is the popper.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to create the line of pulls where the right rib cage is as close toward the side as possible, because we're trying to create length here,
Okay.
right? So if you rotate in, good, give me as much crunch as you can. Good, can't go any further, right?
No, I don't think so.
So your line of pull would essentially be here,
Ah, okay.
right? So
And
now
I
with
could
a tight
anchor
enough,
that side,
yeah, you
like
can
a-
actually anchor it in your hand if you wanted to.
and I could anchor the other side like on the Swedish ladder or something.
Or that, exactly. Yeah, so the Swedish ladder is going to be amazing for that, because you can anchor it nice and low.
Yeah.
And then the tighter this is, the more of a successful block it will make. Make sure you stay rotated. Now, essentially, when you're doing your pails, you're trying to push against this line of
So I'm
pull.
trying to come out.
Yup. So actually, the anchor would probably be best here for your
Right.
pails.
Okay, so face the ladder.
Yep. And then your rails, you're trying to go with.
Right, so trying to come.
Yep. Yeah, so that's going to give you more stretch in all of these opposing tissues that will actually help to lift the rib cage.
Yeah.
And then activation is going into that regressive angle. Then that's activating all the tissues that reinforce that rib cage drop.
Yeah, so this is the way it likes to go, so yeah. Go.
Yep. So in this case, with a band, because it has this ability to pull in both directions, I would say pick your pails first, right?
Okay.
Pails, 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 the anchor is behind.
Oh,
Or
and that's
rather,
changed.
I'm sorry, the anchor is in front. You're trying to pails away, but that line is so tight that it's not allowing you to pull away. It should overpower you, right?
Okay.
And then rails, regressive angle, you're trying to pull against the anchor behind.
So just change position for the,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, okay. So let me just really quick again. So this is,
Here, actually, let me be your anchor. So your arm doesn't have to work.
so,
So this is,
oh, wow.
yep, so now try and get this to go back to neutral. Yep.
I like this. This feels really good. Hard, but good. Oh, that's nice. And then, so then.
Yep, regressive ankle, you're just going with.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like
So when you're loading the regressive angle, the anchor would change,
Yeah, so
essentially,
then I
because
have
then
to-
you're trying to drive into the regressive angle. But with the pails and rails, you can anchor in front.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that a lot. That felt really, really good.
And it talks to a bunch of different tissues. So I mean, to say, you know, for some people I'd be like, QL is where your attention is. This is going to talk to QL, but really it's talking to QL. It's talking to all of your multifidi. It's talking to the fascial QL junction. It's talking to your shoulder. It's talking to your neck. It's talking to a bunch of different things in your sacrum.
You definitely feel my hip complex talking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was nice. Okay. So, so what I feel like is like I jumped in, I'm trying to prep for this hike in July, and I'm like, not very much glute, not very much hamstring. I want to, you know, it's trying to work on this, but I think I jumped in and didn't prep very well. So going back, regressing back, just lighter weight, less, what would my regression be for that, do you think?
Regression for your hike?
Yeah, just
I
instead
wouldn't
of,
exactly call it a regression so much as, you know, the prep work involved, right?
yeah,
And anytime we're doing vitamin movement, to coin, or
Yeah,
to use
yeah.
an expression that Katie coined, the amount of information is always going to be fractional compared to what is actually going to happen.
right,
But in the case of a hike, most of the time, especially if you're packing, you're going to be here or you're going to be looking downhill, right?
yeah,
So I would say the best prep or vitamin exercises specific to dealing with this constant load, which is going to be an endurance load, is going to be number one, a step up.
yeah, I have a box.
Ideally, the step up would be very textured, right?
Yeah.
So that it can mimic the textures that are going on,
Yeah,
or try to, because it's impossible to completely nail it.
right,
Right? But the specificity of your step up should be in this, the step itself is a little bit, actually, this would be a better position. So when I do load, I'm trying to have my heel grounded. I'm trying to feel weight at the center of my foot, and I'm trying to get as much ankle dorsiflexion as I possibly can.
yeah,
And then once I load, I'm trying to make sure that all my weight is at the center of my foot. On the way down, I'm trying to do the same thing. Right?
yeah,
I can do that very same exercise from behind so that I get this feeling of I've got a boulder in front of me.
right, narrower. Yeah.
Right? Same kind of feeling of center of the foot pressing, right? And then I also want to have,
Yeah, the step down.
but this one is very specific as well because I don't want my foot to have this space on the side. I want to be able to decelerate my weight till my heel touches without this heel lifting off,
Yeah,
and then come right back up the very same way. And if I want to prep the tissues in a way that's conducive to developing strength or even muscle girth, I want to really focus on that eccentric phase as best I can,
yeah,
and think of the concentric phases as plyometric, right? I want to come up as fast and powerful as I can to position. sled pulls are probably one of the best exercises, especially when done properly. I'll show you what I mean. I'm gonna be your sled.
Okay.
You hold on here.
Okay.
So first I'm gonna show you the foot pattern here, right?
Uh-huh.
So hold on with both hands. Good. So as I'm pulling my sled, I'm trying to reach my toes back, and then as I'm grounding my heel, I'm actually pulling with the leg as well. I'm pulling with this back leg, and then as I step, you can come with me a little bit, I'm actually reaching back, grounding the toes, grounding the heel, and then pushing as I pull through, right?
Got it.
So what happens when people do a lot of pulling exercises is they tend to turn their body away from the line of pull, which changes the orientation of the hip.
Right.
And they also tend to step in a way where the front leg is doing all of the work,
Okay.
right? But what I want to do is get that foot active through dorsiflexion and then plantar flex my way through that action. And what happens is that all of the tissues that are involved with stabilizing the knee have a different vector. So the force is totally different than when I do deadlifts. Very much similar to this action,
Sure.
right? Where I'm trying to fight that heel from coming up, right?
Yep.
The load is a little more conducive to that angle.
Okay.
And that sends a lot of different information into the knee, which preps it for more downhill resilience,
Okay.
if you will.
I'm thinking of like ways that I could load up my wheelbarrow. Pull it back.
Or even your ladder.
Oh, I
Anchor
could
the
put,
band
yeah,
to
I
the
could
ladder.
anchor to the ladder and just back up and
Yep.
come forward.
Boom.
Oh, I could do that totally.
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
And then forward for
Oh,
reps.
yeah, I could do that.
Obviously, you know, sled is probably going to be a little more real world applicable information.
Yeah, I don't really have anything like that. But
Um,
I can play around with stuff I have in my house. I could probably rig something up. I can drag a kettlebell around the backyard or something.
That's a good way too, as long as the kettlebell is super heavy. I mean, you definitely want to load this to a point where it's challenging the muscular endurance and is
Okay.
significant enough drag. So I would say if you can't get a sled going, then the ladder anchor is going to be a great
I
idea.
have a bunch of pallets. I could probably just throw a pallet down. They're pretty heavy. We have a bunch of pallets left over from various things. I could maybe drag a pallet.
Why not?
Yeah, that
And anytime you're dragging, try not to use your biceps.
right.
Your arms are straight lines. Your thoracic spine is going to like you a lot more for that.
Yeah.
So are your shoulders, and you won't develop any tendonitis from holding this position for a very long time.
Right. Okay.
So when you are pulling, remember, reach back with the foot first. Once that foot is grounded, that's the foot that's doing the pulling, right? So there's probably about 80% of your load coming from here, and then once you ground this foot, this is the foot that's doing the pulling, right?
Okay.
So it's always ground and push, ground and push.
Okay.
And that step up, or step down rather, is going to be the perfect accompaniment. It really gives all of the tissues near the meniscus, all the tissues on the anterior portion of your tibia, and your quadriceps and hamstrings start working together in a slightly different manner than they do in deadlifting and stepping up
Yeah,
regularly.
that makes sense. I mean, that's what I always tell clients too. Is, you know, work the eccentric phase more, and pay more attention to slow and more quickly on the concentric. Okay, I can manage that. So I think still the issue that I'm struggling with, not that this is your problem to fix, obviously, but is I think that I still don't have this mastered. And so do I just need to go back to our first couple lessons and work with the band in this
So
range
part
and
of
work
it is-
more with the breathing?
Yeah, part of it is cars and part of it is that muscle irradiation. But those things have to have a carryover to when you're moving, right? So I mean, while those things are key to foundation, the practice of actually doing them in real time is going to be what really plays a role. So
Sure.
with the sled stuff, with the step up stuff, I would say another great accompaniment that adds to movement strength is going to be carries. So
Yeah,
farmers carries,
farmers carries.
waiters carries, right? Rack carries, and making them asymmetrical as well as bilateral.
So asymmetrical as in only carrying on one side, or in changing your carry?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, without weight on one side, your body does not have a counterweight. It's forced to perform totally differently.
Right.
Right? With one weight down and one weight up, even though there is this counterbalance, again, your body's performing totally differently.
Okay.
When you start to introduce all of those variables, I mean, in undulation, obviously, your body starts to develop these lines of stress that are unique. And as you're moving, those lines of stress are now becoming more robust, right? So the idea is to try to expose your body to all of these different positions with all of these different weights and all of these
Yeah.
different angles.
That makes
And do not be afraid to ever overload, right? And what I mean by overload is not going to 1,000,000%.
Right.
It's not 100%. It's a pattern of today, I'm gonna go to my perceived 60%. Day after tomorrow, I'm going to 75%, right? And when you write down what your perception is, you'd be surprised
I'm
over
supposed to be
time.
writing it down?
It's the best way.
I
mean,
know.
you know, whenever you get precise in that sense,
Yeah.
you start to realize, wow, my perception of 75% 4 weeks ago is definitely a lot less than what I perceive today,
Okay.
right? And then you have an actual, right? Because sometimes the central nervous system just needs that exposure to start developing a different baseline of strength, right?
Yeah, I think I just need to put more time into it. It's been very hard for me to have the time, and so just this week I was like, okay, I can now set aside time to focus on this stuff, but I'm very, very badly organized around it right now. So writing it down, that makes sense, but that's another step for me to
Get yourself
in
a
there.
scribble book.
Yeah.
Right? A scribble book is going to give you a lot of leeway, right? Because in my scribble book, the first thing I always write, starting on Sunday, what do I have planned for tomorrow? And if I have the patience, I'll plan Wednesday, right? But during my plan for tomorrow, I do not give myself a goal that's not attainable, first and foremost. So if I know that I may have this half-hour plan, you know what? I'm going to commit to 15 to 20 minutes. Right? Because 15 to 20 minutes is ultra doable,
Right.
right? So 15, 20 minutes. What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to do some farmers carries. What am I going to commit to, right? Always commit to something doable. Write down the perceived number, and then the next day, get to the baseline or bottom line of what you committed to. So even if it's 15 minutes, do the 15 minutes, right? If for some reason your day becomes one of those days where life happens, then commit to 5 minutes 3 times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a big part of it is just hasn't been something I have planned and put on my calendar, and I don't function very well if I don't put it on my calendar. So I think that's the step I need to make is put it on my calendar, and you're right, write down what I intend to do, because otherwise it becomes this amorphous, like, oh, well, what should I work on today?
You ever read that? Well, this is from a couple different clients that I've had in the past that told me about this book. I've never read it personally, but there's a book called He's Not That Into You.
No, I've heard of it though.
Yeah, right? So, but I always tell people, how into yourself are you? Right? And I always use the catchphrase, prioritize you. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, well, you know, I work too much to do this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, work is going to get all of your attention. You're probably going to exceed there. But when you're outside of work, your body's going to fucking hate you,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
So prioritize you, and you're going to be better at getting to work, and you're going to feel better outside of work, right? But if you're not into yourself, it's going to show with how much time you give yourself for prioritization. And if you're not into yourself, whatever you decide to do for fun, your body might just tell you to go fuck yourself at some point.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can't have fun.
Yeah.
So always have this barest minimum of you time where you think of your body, because your body takes you through space, right? It helps you have fun with your kids. It helps you go to work. It helps you feel comfortable outside of work, whether you choose to go for a walk or whether you choose to sit in front of the television.
Right.
Either one of those things can happen with pain.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've been prioritizing walking because that's something that I just it makes me feel good. I know it's healthy. I like being outside. I get to see things. So I've been walking. I've been doing my cars. I prioritize that stuff. But yeah, I think I need to be a little more thoughtful or mindful about how I prioritize this, getting back towards really focusing on improving all of this stuff. But so scribble book, that would be a
Scribble
good
book.
thing. And planning, that would be a
Yep.
good
The night
thing.
before, you plan at least the next day.
Okay.
Commit to the barest minimum for yourself.
Okay.
Right? So if it's 10 minutes, be honest with yourself. That 10 minutes is all I'm going to have. I'm going to commit to 10 minutes. If life happens in a way that gives you more than 10 minutes, you might feel amped up to do more. In that case, be careful how much you do,
Right.
right? Because too much today might mean that I can't do anything tomorrow.
Yeah.
But prioritize you, be into yourself.
Yeah. I
Right.
mean, I think that's really good advice. It's a good way of framing it. So, I mean, you work with older people, so you see people who are starting to shrink their muscle mass and so forth, which is the problem
Muscle
having.
mass is one of the biggest issues that people sleep on. And you know, a lot of people really don't want to pay attention to it until it's too late. And even when it's too late, you can still see progress.
Yeah.
But you really have to be adamant about doing everything that's necessary.
Well, that's where I'm at. Is like, okay, I'm just shy of 60, and I'm really noticing my muscle mass has shrunk considerably, and there's osteopenia in my family. I haven't had a bone density check, but if I were to guess, I would guess I'm probably osteopenic at least.
Where
in
there's a
this hip.
decrease in muscle mass, there's definitely a decrease in
Yeah.
bone mass.
Probably in my rib cage too. So it's like I know I understand this is it's moved up in my priority list. So it's a good time for me to get serious about it.
Loading
Yeah.
is going to be a great way. From the information that I've taken in over 20 years, I would say rest in peace, Charles Poliquin has the best information as far as loading. He really was a huge advocate of time under tension. And that's going to do a lot for your muscles and your bones. But stimulating them in that fashion is one thing that helps them to gain that density and that mass. Having the building blocks for that is a whole other thing.
Right.
You know, and I would say 100% of the people that I train, even the athletes, don't eat enough protein. Even people who think, oh, I eat a lot of protein. I eat protein in every meal. When we jot the numbers down and we really start to weigh food, which can be a little crazy feeling, right? Because who does that? I do.
So, like, Tom, what is your daily intake of protein look like?
My minimum is going to be at about 150 grams.
Okay.
And my maximum, yesterday I took in, let's see.
Yeah, just like what is that meal plans? I mean, besides just like amount, what is that? What is it you're eating?
Mostly animal products.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what are you having for breakfast? What are you having for lunch?
Because we made this big move and I decided that, it was best to get rid of most of my clientele. I don't have as much money to buy the things that I like.
Right.
So I go with the barest minimums. Most of it is going to be like ground beef, liver. When you got to taste my pate.
I mean, pate maybe, but yeah.
That's the way I eat it.
Do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it is decadent to say the least.
Yeah, pate I can get around.
I'll
Liver.
bring some next week for you.
Oh, really?
And every single person I ever asked to taste it never goes back.
Yeah, pate is pretty good. I think it's the texture with liver, right? When you just eat liver.
It's
like,
harsh.
oh.
It is harsh.
Yeah.
I think the best liver I've ever tasted was raw.
Oh man, you
When
are
it's-
adventuresome.
When it's sliced thin, and I hated liver all my life. I started eating liver 5 years ago.
Okay.
All my life I was like, screw that, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
But the more I read on the nutrient density, the more I knew that it is necessary, especially for people our age.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're eating. Breakfast is
So I'll tell you what breakfast is exactly. Usually it's something easy and easily digestible, which is usually ground beef or some fish.
Okay.
And then, whatever else I choose. So if I have a really busy day, I might have some dates, as an extra energy source. On the days when I'm not really having carbohydrates, I might have some bone marrow, salted. Sardines are excellent.
So like
basically
smoked
those are-
salmon would be all right.
Smoked salmon is good. As long, for me personally, I kind of look into the nuances of smoked, right?
I know.
If they poured liquid smoke into it,
Yeah.
probably not the best thing for me.
Right.
But if it's actually smoked,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
It's not a concentration of some liquid chemical.
Yeah. Right.
You know.
Chemicals and stuff.
Okay, so nutrition, and I log religiously. So yesterday was 178 grams of protein. The day before was 230 grams of protein. Day before that was 262 grams of protein.
Wow. And you weigh everything you eat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is dedication, man.
Well, I'm the last 3 years especially, I've been really dedicated to it. I think I told you that, after my plant-based thing, I lost a lot of muscle mass. And I noticed that when I didn't weigh things out, I just wouldn't get enough.
Okay.
And then I would weigh it again, like, oh, what did I eat yesterday? Let me weigh that now. And like 105 grams, that's like literally nearing the recommended dietary intake, which is RDI, which is what they tell you so that you don't die from
Right.
protein issues,
Okay.
which is not good.
How are eggs figuring in there?
Eggs are good. Eggs are like 6 or 7 grams of protein, depending on the size.
Okay.
And if I do eat eggs, it's quite a large amount. I mean, for me personally, I could eat a dozen eggs in one sitting.
Okay.
On a lighter day, I would say the minimum I have is probably about 5 eggs.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm shooting way under that.
Super high in choline too. Really good for you, eggs.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I eat for breakfast every day. Is usually 2 eggs and maybe 2 slices of like Canadian bacon, like the less chemicalized
Yeah, no
Canadian
curing.
bacon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have that with like a handful of berries or something and coffee. But it sounds like I should have maybe 4 eggs.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're a person, because I eat probably twice a day. I feel like 3 meals a day usually doesn't happen because I'm so busy.
Yeah.
And I feel like my body actually likes twice a day.
Okay.
The first time around doing that, somebody would have a very difficult time getting half of their protein or more in the first meal.
Right.
So I always tell people, if you're a 3-time-a-day eater, try to get about 50 grams of protein in each meal.
Okay.
At the end of the day, you'll equal about 150 grams, more or less.
Okay.
And just trying to do that, you'll get a sense of, wow, this is hard because I'm not used to doing it. My stomach is now not used to digesting. So sometimes after a big meal like that, because your body takes about 30% of the calories from protein to actually break protein down,
Yeah.
it's gonna feel like that digestion, I'd feel a little lazy, but that gets better.
Okay.
And now, I'll have, for breakfast, here, I'll show you. So, let's say Thursday. I had lamb chops, that's 39 grams of protein, and I also had 7.5 ounces of ground beef, that's 56 grams of protein. So
For
somewhere around.
breakfast?
That was for breakfast.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is. It is. And you'll find that, sometimes your body wants a fattier meat,
Yeah.
in which, beef is probably going to be best, pork is really good. And then sometimes your body wants a lighter meat, in which, like, salmon is going to be best, or cod, or
Okay.
I like rockfish too because it's super cheap.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean I definitely am not eating anywhere close to that. Like I had a beef, I had eggs and ham for breakfast yesterday. I make my own granola that's really low sugar, but like full of like walnuts, walnuts, almonds, pecans, a little bit of barley flakes and seeds, a lot of seeds, hemp seed. Have that with berries and oat milk for lunch, and then I had beef curry with chickpeas and brown rice and a salad for dinner. So like that's kind of how I eat usually.
That sounds good. There's a lot of micronutrient intake, it sounds like, which is
but
awesome.
Maybe not as much protein.
That's the thing. So that's a lot of people will be eating healthy in the sense of they're getting this variability of micronutrients, which is awesome. But when that space that you're taking in takes up the more valuable, what should be the staple, I would say actively start to amp up the staple while giving yourself enough room to still have those micronutrients,
Okay.
right? And sometimes the scale kind of tips drastically when someone does that, right? Because I don't notice, I have a lot of great micronutrients, but I don't notice how much fuller I am when I have this abundance of stuff and I can't eat enough protein.
Right.
So when I start to amp up my protein, now the fullness is even greater, right?
Okay.
Because satiating, right? Protein
Right.
is satiating.
Yeah.
So you might be feeling like you're taking a little less micronutrient intake, but that's okay.
Yeah, I find I get a real sugar craving in the evening. And
Okay.
after I eat dinner, I'm full-ish, but then, I want chocolate or chocolate mostly.
Okay, and that's not a bad deal.
Right.
Carbohydrates in the evening are actually a really great way to send you into REM. Really great.
Right.
I would say if that carbohydrate was giving you a weight issue, which it isn't,
Right.
then we would check it. But otherwise, have your chocolate.
Yeah.
Make sure it's a good source chocolate,
Yeah.
and just make sure that stuff is not taking away from your protein intake.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like I really need to ramp protein intake
Yeah.
up a lot.
I would say with anyone that I train for nutrition, I always say take 2 weeks to get familiar with the protein that's going in your body. Don't change anything yet, right? See how much is going in. And a scale is actually going to allow you to do that.
I have a scale.
For people who get a little crazy and think I want them to count calories, this is not about counting calories
yeah.
at all. In fact, I don't care how many calories you're taking in.
Yeah. I'm way past the whole calorie thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Then calorie counter is not going to be a bad idea because calorie counter gives you a general estimate as to how much protein is in each of the foods based on the weight. Your scale is going to be something that's really easy to get used to. Everybody's like, oh, I got to weigh my food. I'm like, dude, when you put your plate on the counter so that it comes, whatever's coming off your pan, tear your plate off, put it on there and just jot it down. And then while you're eating, you can put it into your calorie counters just so you have a journal, right?
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even have thought of that.
And then after that 2-week period, make the adjustments that are necessary to start scaling up the protein significantly.
Okay. So you like ground beef. I have a ton of ground beef and